It was the podcast appearance heard around the world. Joe Rogan had some harsh words on his show yesterday for journalist Douglas Murray.
Recall that Murray had joined Rogan and comedian Dave Smith for a separate conversation last month. The episode went viral after Murray scolded Rogan for allegedly not platforming enough pro-Israel voices.
Murray also kept insinuating that experts' opinions on matters like the Gaza conflict were more valid and necessary than people like Smith's opinions. Here's Rogan addressing this on his show yesterday.
Yeah. This appeal to experts, just because you have a degree, you're not always right. You're wrong all the time. Douglas Murray, I love him dearly. I think he's a brilliant man. He's got a degree in history, or he's got a degree in English, bachelor's degree. Okay, he's not an expert either. Unless we're talking about Shakespeare, shut the up, because you're not an expert either. You know what I mean?
So Murray recently appeared on journalist Bari Weiss's podcast and addressed the debate. Here's what he had to say.
I intervened on that episode on Rogan because I just felt I had to, and I'm glad I did, but I'm sorry that some people have willfully or otherwise decided to completely misrepresent what I was saying.
So, this is a much talked about thing that happened on Rogan's podcast, this debate between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. What is new about it, what is fresh, is now Joe Rogan is weighing in and basically saying that he agrees with the Dave Smith perspective, not the Douglas Murray perspective, which I think is interesting. I think it was a useful debate. I think both sides made some good points. I am friendly with both Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. I've agreed and disagreed with them both on the past. Sometimes Dave Smith and I argue with each other. He's been on Rising, though, before. I generally agree with Dave Smith on foreign policy and on this issue they were debating, in particular, Israel-Gaza. And I certainly agree that expertise is not the end-all, be-all, and we must just, defer and bow down to the experts. Experts get things wrong, particularly on foreign policy. The experts all said that invading Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya and Syria and turning them, they'll welcome us as liberators. That wasn't just the view of the Bush administration or the Obama administration. That was the view of foreign policy experts, that remaking the Middle East to be a pro-America democracy would be necessary and easy and it'd be great and we'd all love it and wonderful. They were catastrophically wrong. So that's why I don't listen to experts. That said, I agree with Douglas Murray that now that doesn't mean that every anti-expert person is right either, that every contrarian perspective should just be accepted as true, or that every person who's been on Rogan, who's anti-experts, is right about what they're saying. I think you should listen to everybody and make your own conclusions.
I agree with you, and I think that podcasting is platform. Yes, I said I agree with you.
Yeah.
I think podcasting is platforming because with Joe Rogan, I think the problem is that sometimes if you have somebody who's not an expert, right, or it just comes on as a comedian or whatever, when stuff hits the fan and it's a debate of apples to apples about historical facts, analysis, research versus your opinions, that's not like a fair suited debate. I think people should be on the same platforms at the same time if they actually want to get into a significant debate that have a similar knowledge and represent two different sides of an issue so that we can hear rebuttals and conversations with actual information that's been researched. Because what comedians can do is hide behind, well, I never said I knew anything. That's my opinion. And it's like, all right, but people are taking what you're saying as law. When you platform somebody, I'm sorry, sometimes the American public takes that as somebody who's an authoritative voice.
Well,
and it's not the fault of Joe Rogan, but it's the fault of us for not...
I mean, Jon Stewart's a comedian, and he's someone that liberals look to for analysis and expertise about what's wrong with the Republican Party and Trump and others, right? What's the difference there?
There are several comedians on both sides, and that's what I said. You have to be hesitant about looking to people that are interviewees or have shows of interviewing people, and then even put their analysis. You have to be careful, especially when you're a platform that's as big as Joe Rogan's, with telling somebody because I think you could easily have a conversation like, well, if there's so much debate about this back and forth with Israel and the Palestinian conflict, then why did either of you guys support Trump? Right? That's the bigger conversation. Like, if you disagree with the lives that are being taken in Gaza, the extreme level of people that have been killed at this point, and you think that it's gone a little bit too far, which is kind of what the conversation and where maybe Joe Rogan was taking it. It's like, well, Trump was supported, and out of the two parties, he was probably a little bit more aggressive in supporting giving Israel carte blanche.
I don't know that I agree with that. I don't know that Douglas Murray does support Trump, or he probably likes some aspects of Trump and doesn't like some aspects of others. Dave Smith has publicly said, I believe, that he voted for Trump in part because he thought Trump's foreign policy, again, not to put words in his mouth, but this is the general vibe I get from engaging with his opinions, is that he thought Trump would be the less bloodthirsty of the two. I think that opinion was not necessarily ill-considered. In fact, there were a lot of Democrats, there were a lot of Arab Americans in my home state of Michigan who did not, who declined to join the Democrats' enthusiasm for the Democratic ticket because Joe Biden had failed to constrain what was going on in the Middle East at all. Kamala Harris did not say one word she would do differently. And so they lost the support of these voters. I think they tried to gaslight those people into thinking it might be different without offering any way that it would be different.
Well, I also think...
and then Trump immediately forced a deal on a hostage deal and a brief ceasefire.
Brief.
Well, unfortunately ended, but...
yeah. I think what people read from that, and Douglas Murray, he gave like an elitist, touch the grass kind of answer. But it's like, what are the parameters on what you're setting up in this debate? So people are watching it. So are you just watching it for entertainment? Are you just watching this podcast just for, because I think people are actually taking information and taking that as a fact from these people. And like what I agreed with Joe Rogan on is that neither of them are experts. Like, as much as you might have a great British accent and speak well, that doesn't mean you're an expert on every single policy you discuss. Nobody can be an expert on all things, right? You can just be well-read and equally yoked as whoever's next to you and have a conversation, or two people with an opinion just chatting. We have to really decide what the conversation is.
Well, like, what is an expert? What is a...
you
don't carry a little car. It's not like a license that says qualified expert.
No, but have you worked
what would be the licensing regime?
Okay, if we're talking about a historical documentary, have you studied history? Like seriously, or have you at least took the time to be well researched about it? Like, I think
you're not an expert is weaponized by people against. I would, again, on foreign policy subjects, I would rather take someone. I would be more likely to agree with someone who does not self-describe themselves as an expert, because experts have been running our foreign policy for the last 30 years with ruinous, destructive results.
So maybe we should put comedians in place in the government to run and make foreign
policy
by
decisions.
Me. Maybe Walsh should be a comedian. Maybe
fine by me.
That's kind of a ridiculous stance. I think people
not.
Actually have experience in this and studied history and seen, well, if this didn't work out for us in the 90s, I don't think it's going to work out for us in 2025.
Those people,
if this didn't work in the 60s, they're looking at historical so they don't repeat history, hopefully. And sometimes they get it wrong and they make big mistakes that we suffer from. But I think if you worked in those industries, you at least have the wherewithal and experience to discuss it, versus if you just observe those industries, it's a different conversation. It just really is.
Well, and you can also find experts on multiple sides of every issue. There are very knowledgeable people that think, for instance, the catastrophic warnings about climate change and what's going to happen are overblown. Deeply well-researched, deeply well-considered expert people who think the fatalists are wrong. There are, experts on both sides of economic issues. Experts have been debating for decades how much, for instance, minimum wage, raising the minimum wage, does that decrease labor force participation? Hotly contested subject in economics. You have tons of experts who will swear, no, it doesn't. We've done the research. Here's the evidence. We've run the studies. It's fine to raise the minimum wage. You won't cause unemployment. There's tons of experts on the other side who say, but look at all my studies showing exactly the opposite effect.
So are you better for watching
disagree.
Two people from whichever industry discussing it because they're people in America, or are you better watching people that have studied the issue? You tell me. Well, better watching just two people that just want to chat.
Well, yeah, maybe we want to. It's not wrong to platform or consult experts as well. It's just that being an expert is not predictive of being right. I would say that it would be better in some of these interviews where more amateur people are spouting off if they get more pushback from the host. But the reason we're talking about this in the context of Joe Rogan is really COVID. And it goes back to the monologue I did today. It's because Rogan became notable for platforming non-expert people who disagreed with what experts were saying about various aspects of mitigating the harms of COVID and where it came from. And it turned out that on that subject, not every subject, but on that subject, a lot of the things that contrarian skeptics with less expertise pushed back on ended up being correct. We now know that with a masking guidance changed 14 different times, Fauci initially said, no mask, don't bother, then get a mask, any mask, then actually only the most powerful masks are doing any good. He admitted he made up the 6 feet of social distancing rule on the spot. There is very little statistical evidence that anything pre-vaccination changed the mortality rates. And say, if you look at the states and the mortality rates, states had vastly different lockdown, masking, mandate policies. There's not very much variation in death rates until you get vaccines. And then there is variation depending on how quick the vaccine take-up was. These are, I would say the expertise didn't fare so well on these subjects.
Right. It's hard to be an expert in an unforeseen dramatic circumstance like COVID, but I hear you.
Mm-hmm. Up next, a 2-time kidney recipient who says organ donors should be paid. We'll interview her. Stay tuned.